quickly, because otherwise it gets really chaotic otherwise. And apologies again for the amount of people in this room. Okay, and here comes Anna and Indra. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for joining us for this very meaningful Angevin talk. Our special guest this evening stands as a pivotal figure in modern business leadership, charting a remarkable course from a traditional upbringing in Madras, now Chennai, India, to the highest echelons of global corporate power as the chairman and CEO of PepsiCo. Her tenure marked her as the first woman and immigrant to lead a Fortune 50 company in America, breaking significant barriers in the corporate world. Her leadership at PepsiCo was categorized by profound strategic shifts, including major restructuring efforts, significant diversification through key acquisitions, and impressive financial performance, nearly doubling the company's revenue during her time as CEO, taking it from $35 billion to over $63 billion. Shareholder return, 162%. Central to her legacy is the Performance with Purpose initiative, which we'll talk about, a visionary strategy that was transformative. Since stepping down from PepsiCo in 2019, our guest continues to exert significant influence through prominent board memberships at global corporations and ongoing advisory roles with institutions such as Yale, MIT, and Temasek, and ongoing public commentary. She remains a sought-after voice on leadership, corporate strategy, the impact of technology like AI, navigating geopolitical complexities, and the critical need for purpose-driven business practices in the 21st century. Please join me in welcoming Indra Nooyi. Excuse my little light, but the last talk I couldn't see a thing. Indra, thank you. Let's start at the beginning. You grew up in a very tightly knit, multi-generational family in Madras. Your mother held nightly sessions asking you, for example, and your sister, what you would do, for example, if you were prime minister. It was competitive. How did those early assignments shape you?
First, thank you for having me. And where's Mohammed? I met Mohammed many, many years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And I became a fan of Mohammed until I met Anna. And then I was gone. So Mohammed, you and I share that in common. We meet Anna and we're gone. But it's a privilege to be here. Anna, thank you for having me for this talk. Look, I was born just 7 years after India got independence. So this is very early in the country's history as an independent country. And in the South, which was very conservative, the North was also, but the South is very conservative. Women really studied home science or nursing maybe, and got married, arranged marriages at age 18. And that was the norm. I had the luck of the draw. I was born into a family where the men believed that the women should dream and do whatever they want to do. So my father and my grandfather said, look, we're not going to stop you. Study as much as you can. We'll fund all your studies. But if you get poor grades, you will be married off to somebody they pick. All right? So the grades was the gating factor. And my mother, poor lady, kept saying, but I have to get them married at 18 because society will sort of dump on me if I don't get them married at 18 because people will think nobody wants to marry them.
Right.
And my father and grandfather said, don't worry, we'll take care of that. There was one particular incident which is vivid in my memory. My older sister was a year older than me and fiercely competitive, the two of us. She got admission to the business school after she finished her undergraduate degree and had to go away from home. And my mom said, you can't leave home until you get married. And she said, I'm not getting married, I'm going to business school. My grandfather paid the tuition for the business school. And my mother said, I'm going to fast till I die because you're leaving home without getting married. So my kids were terrified. Father, grandfather called us and said, don't worry, if she dies, it's okay. We'll take care of you. We will take care of you. You don't have to worry. 24 hours later, the fast was gone. My mom's now 93, going on 94, going strong. So you see, there was one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator at home. But I think what my mother did, just to shut us up at dinner time, was when she was having dinner, she would have the two daughters give speeches on, if you were prime minister of the country, what would you do? If you were chief minister of the state, what would you do? And she would pick who gave the better speech at the end of dinner. And the prize was a little square of a Cadbury's chocolate bar. Those of you who remember the old good chocolate, was one little square, half of it. And we licked the prize for about half an hour. And I have to tell you, that licking of that half of a chocolate square in the 60s tasted better than a full bar today. I still remember it. But that instilled in us a sense of we can be anything and a sense of you've got to constantly think about how can you contribute way beyond your means.
So that the values that they instilled in you and your sister, and then, of course, your younger brother, how did that prepare you for the path you took?
Some of it was just passing time. Some of it was you feel it deeply. Look, that was a time there was no computer, there was no internet. We just read. We read everything we could lay our hands on. There was nothing to do in Chennai, nothing in Madras then.
Yeah.
There was literally nothing to do. My parents wouldn't let us see movies because they thought they would corrupt the brain. So what can you do at home? I mean, you read everything that you could lay your hands on. We ran out of classics and Mills and Boone and Enid Blyton to read. Just literally ran out of everything. Richmond Crompton, Biggles, William, you name it. We've read everything now. The lending library is out of books to lenders. And so we said, what do we do? So my sister and I start French lessons and we start German lessons. Then I start saying, my Saturdays are still free. So I'll go play cricket or I will go wash gypsy children on the weekends because they come to a certain part of the city in the weekend and somebody said, would you like to help read to them and clean them up?
Wow.
So sure, I'll help out. It was boredom that drove a lot of their activity. But then after a while, you start looking at this and saying, my God, you can actually make a difference. And little by little, that sense of purpose comes to you. And you stop looking at the world through your blinders, but you start having a real 180-degree view of the world and saying, how can I make sure that I look beyond my immediate area and look at everything around me? And I think that's how it evolved over time.
So, we don't have a lot of time to go over. You had significant education in India, but you found an article about SOM in Newsweek, SOM being at Yale, which I'll leave you to talk to us about. But your acceptance and entrance into Yale was clearly a pivotal moment in your life. And you overcame those initial difficulties, which underscores your inherent resilience and determination as a person and as I've gotten to know you. Can you reminisce with us on your time at Yale?
Yeah, I went to, my sister went to one of the business schools, I went to the other. There were only 3 at that time. She went to the one affiliated with Harvard, I went to the one affiliated with MIT because she said, we've been in school and college together for all these years. If I see you at business school with me around, it's over. So we had to go to 2 different schools. And I graduated from there, went to work for Toodles of Manchester, of Macclesfield, really, in India, and had a very good time. And Then all my friends had come to the United States to study, and they said, look, you've got to get here. This is the seat of innovation, entrepreneurship, excitement, cultural advancement. What the hell are you still doing in India? And so when I was sitting at the US Consulate Library and reading the old issues of Newsweek magazine, I found an article about this new school that has started at Yale called the Yale School of Management.
Right.
It was actually called Yale School of Organization and Management. And they were giving out a degree called the MPPM, Masters in Public and Private Management. How to blend the public, private, and nonprofit sectors together. Because society depends on all three legs to be successful. And given everything I felt about purpose, I thought this was a great way to onboard into the United States and a master's program. So I applied, knowing full well I wouldn't get it. And then I found out I got in. Then my parents couldn't afford to send me, so they said, perish the thought. And so I perished the thought until I got a letter saying, we've given you loans and work study programs, so half the amount in loans and half the amount you have to work it off. So sure. And the only thing my parents did was bought me an air ticket to the United States, which I think was, again, luck of the draw. They could have said, you've got to marry some big guy before you leave. But they didn't. They even came to the airport and sent me off. And so I landed in the United States, and life has never been the same. I entered through the front door with a visa legally, and I must say, that it's in my book. That was words are in my book.
wasn't supposed to be funny.
No, it wasn't. But and I have to tell you that the country embraced me in every which way. Mentors came out of the woodwork. I worked very hard, and I must say, over this weekend, past weekend, was my Yale 45th reunion. And it was on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. On Friday, Raj and I went to the reception. On Saturday, I didn't go to the reunion. And Raj kept telling me, why aren't you going to the reunion? I said, let me tell you why. Because when I was at Yale for 2 years, I was the outcast. I didn't belong to any clique. There were 5 or 6 of us international students that hung out together. We dressed badly. We just didn't know all the cultures and the habits and the mannerisms of all the kids there.
Right.
So we stuck together. We sort of enjoyed each other's misery because we had no friends outside the circle. And we dressed so badly. Now I think about it and go, oh my God, because we didn't have any money to buy clothes. And all the people who were at the reunion, who subsequently have become great friends, were all part of other cliques that didn't really reach out to us and say, come join our clique. And so I said to Raj, look, I look at them and memories of my time at Yale. Of course, 80% of them were wonderful, but the 20% where I didn't feel like I belonged. I just worked and worked and worked, and some professors pulled me up. All those memories came rushing back. So I think one day, with the group of 20, I'm going to pass, and we didn't go.
Right. It's interesting how events bring back all of those, those memories rush
But those
back.
hardships
Yes,
make
of
you
course.
a stronger person, make you more resilient. And interestingly, I was actually grateful to the United States for welcoming me, those professors for pulling me up. And I said, I fully understand why those kids didn't include me, because I would have been too much of an oddity in those groups. So I forgave them their trespasses, if you want to call it that.
But your substantial contributions to Yale, both financially and with your time, show the significance you've attached to that institution and how they broadened your perspective.
Oh, totally. I am who I am, I would say, mostly because of Yale. Because Yale shaped me, the mentors from Yale, post-Yale. Yale opened all kinds of doors. And I think from this Yale School of Management today, the school is 48 years old. And I am the single largest donor to the Yale School of Management. It was ironic because the class picture on Saturday was being taken in front of the Indra Nooyi classroom. And the dean is the Indra K. Nooyi dean. So it was like an overdose of Indra K. Nooyi. So but I'm grateful to Yale School of Management for giving me all the opportunities they did.
Wonderful. You know, you resonate because Muhammad speaks in exactly the same way about queens.
Absolutely.
And
He loves
I
it.
understand
Oh my
that
God.
he really does.
Next to Anna is Queen's College.
I think Queens is first.
Okay.
Indra, your memoir, which we have here, is subtitled Work, Family, and Our Future. It is a very candid reflection of your personal journey. What was the primary message you hoped to convey? And what was your relationship with all three elements, work, family, and the future? This was a real open-hearted book, and you shared a lot.
So I have to give you what happened before this book was written. I never intended to write a book. I never wanted to do that. What I really wanted to focus on was how do we get childcare into the United States in an organized, systematic way. That's all my focus was. And I wanted to fund organizations working on this. I wanted to make sure governments took this seriously because so many women wanted to enter the workforce, stay in the workforce, and ascend to senior positions. But somewhere in the second level of management, the ladder was broken and they dropped out of the workforce because they wanted to have a family. And we all want the society to have children. And children are a beautiful tether, okay? Just beautiful. I mean, our life is great because of our kids most of the time. But so the question is, how do we get childcare into society so that women can contribute to the economy as well as build families? So that was the whole idea. So I wrote a series of position papers on this topic, fully intending to publish them as my one contribution post PepsiCo to thinking about the future of society. A lot of people read it and said, yawn, it's boring. In the sense that it's such a dry paper.
Right.
So many papers have been written, it probably has a shelf life of a week because it's you. Otherwise, it might be a day, and then people throw it away. And then publishers came to me and said, why don't we talk about the same issue, but use the arc of your life to inform the issue? So build the whole story talking about your own childhood, how you came up, and why family was important to making you a whole person, and how you contributed at work, how you built the support structure, and how the future of the country, societies, communities depends on integrating work and family to create a more harmonious society, to create a more economically rich society, because you need every available talent and hand to be deployed in the economy. So that's how work, family, and our future came together. Thing is, how do we bring the three together?
Right. It's definitely a call to action.
It is. It was intended to be a call to action.
Before we move on, there's a story in the book about your mum telling you to leave your crown in the garage.
Yeah.
Now that resonates strongly. Can you describe to us what happened that
very
day
briefly,
and why you were told your crown needs to stay in the garage?
Well, it was, I think, 2000, and I've just been told, I was in the office at about 10 o'clock in the night, and I got a call from the new CEO saying, Indra, we're going to make you president of the company, put you on the board of directors. We're going to announce this in a couple of days. So I'm like, wow, never thought I'd be that. So I drove home and to tell everybody the news. I pulled into the garage and Radha's car was already there. And I walked up and excited. My mother was waiting at the top of the stairs. And she said, I said, Mom, I've got great news for you. She said, no, I don't want to hear any news. Go get some milk. I said, why don't you have Raj get the milk? He looked tired. Okay? He looked tired whenever he came in, but you want me to go get some milk? So I went out and got some milk, banged it on the kitchen counter. I said, Mom, I'm going to be president of PepsiCo on the board of directors, and you didn't want to hear my news. All that you wanted for me is to go get milk. And she looked at me like I came from Mars, and she said, I don't know what being president of PepsiCo is. I don't know what being board of directors is. But we need milk in this house. And, and when you enter this house, you're the wife, the daughter-in-law, the mother, all of that put together. So for heaven's sake, just leave your crown in the garage. So, since then, I've never had a crown. I don't think so. I have to check with my husband. He has expressive facial features. And two, I've never brought it into the house because, she's right.
Raj is with us this evening. And in the book, you say, Raj is the best thing that ever happened to me. He is, as I've gotten to know him, a scholar and a gentleman. Let's all welcome Raj. Indra, can you name one important fact about Raj that you would like to share, or anything you would like to share about Raj?
Well, when I was at Motorola, and I felt that the work I was doing at Motorola wasn't seeing the light of day. And it was important Motorola made some changes. They didn't. So I went to the president, Chris Galvin, who was the grandson of the founder, and said, Chris, I think I should leave because you just don't need my capability there because I'm doing all this work. You tell me it's outstanding, and then just put it away.
Right.
And I was hyperventilating. I'd come home and I'd hyperventilate because for me, if I did good work and it was useful, somebody has to do something with it. I was not in the business of pushing paper around. And so Raj kept telling me, why are you hyperventilating? Looks like you're miserable at Motorola. I said, I am, but I've got deep loyalty to Chris Galvin. And meanwhile, I was being pulled to work at Asia Brown Boveri by one of my earlier bosses. And I told Chris, I'm leaving to go work with Gerhard. And I had to move from Chicago to the East Coast. Chris Galvin came home, spent a few hours with me explaining why I should not leave an institution for an individual.
Right.
Profound.
Very important.
But after he left, Raj said to me, if you care about your own sanity and peace of mind and your own happiness, you should move. And incidentally, I'll quit my job and move too, which was huge because he was at HP at that time. He loved that company. HP was to him like Queen's College is to Muhammad. He loved HP. And so the fact that he was willing to leave HP and move east, I thought was a sacrifice that very few men will make. And all that I say to everybody here, if you find the right, first of all, find the right spouse. And if you find the right spouse, keep them. So,
You know, the Angevin talks were initially set up for MCR, and then, you know, we grew from there. And we had a lot of dinners here with MCR. And the most profound discussions and the most important discussions that people come back and say to me, that was very meaningful and important, is we discussed that the most important decision you will ever make is who you're going to marry or who your significant other is. It's not work, it's not career, it's not your studies, it's not anything. It is literally that person that can, you know, help your trajectory or can not help you.
mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what you're saying, because I think that is. And so for all the young people and older people in the room. So you became CEO just before the 2008 financial crisis. How did you lead PepsiCo through that period of intense economic pressure while still balancing and advancing long-term initiatives like performance with purpose, which we would also like to discuss a little more?
Actually, one of the interesting things that happen in a crisis is that CEOs get a buy in a way, because you can use the crisis to reset the financials. Yeah. You can use the crisis to say, look, everybody's going to think of the numbers differently. So as long as you can show that you're not collapsing and just somehow plodding through the crisis, you actually get a buy. If you look at COVID, most CEOs got a buy.
Yes.
Today, with tariffs, CEOs will get a buy. During the financial crisis, nobody could model the future of, the models for the company quarterly or annually, because we had no idea how deep the crisis was going to be and how long it was going to last. The challenge we had was, should the crisis take us off our investment trajectory? Right. Because when I took over, we had crafted a whole new direction for the company, which required investment. The challenge was, how do we sustain that investment in the midst of the financial crisis? Because Had I backed off the investments, which required behavioral change in the company, they would have used it as an excuse not to make the changes.
Yes.
It would have been very hard to get them back on this investment trajectory. If I'd stayed with it, investors might question why I'm making these investments in a period where everybody's looking for some short-term, results. From my perspective, I only knew how to run the company one way: run it for the duration of the company, not the duration of the CEO.
Right. And, and long-term legacy.
It's interesting how little things leave a mark on you. When I was growing up, I was asked to read again and again the poem The Brook by Tennyson. There's a chorus in the book which says, "For men may come and men may go, but I go on forever." Okay? And if you look at companies, CEOs may come, CEOs may go, but these companies should last forever. Very often, CEOs run companies for the duration of the CEO, which is terrible.
Right.
Because they say, okay, I can be CEO for 5 years, let me slash and burn, do everything for the short term. And the new guy comes in, he collapses the financials, and then he rides the alpha, as they call it. It's a terribly shareholder destroying way to run a company. But books have been written as to why you should do that. When I became CEO, people kept waiting for me to crash the financials. Now, there were 2 or 3 reasons why I didn't do it. One, I was president under the previous CEO, and I was also the chief financial officer. On what basis will I crash the financials? I couldn't say the previous CFO was an idiot. I had absolutely, and as a president, I was responsible for the strategy of the company, working with the CEO. So there was no reason for me to use that as an excuse to crash the financials. I was on the board of the Fed of New York at that time. I could see that financial crisis literally quarters away. And if you took a reset, and if you don't come out of it stronger, you wasted the reset. And I knew any company has only one chance. And so from my perspective, taking a reset was not an option. So clarity about setting the long-term direction, investing and executing on it was really the only way to go. Now, is Phil Collins here? Is Phil here? No.
Here.
Where?
There he is, over there, hidden in the corner.
So when we did Performance of Purpose, the person who helped me shape the message is your fellow here, Phil Collins. So without him, I couldn't have shaped that as well as it got shaped.
Obviously rubbish.
Hey, that's truth. Come on.
Of course he could have done it. You always say that. It's very generous of you.
You're welcome. Welcome. I mean it. It's okay. It's your word against mine.
Thank you for coming, Phil. Lovely to see you. So, looking back at your tenure, you employed 280,000 people approximately, and you had operations in 180 countries. So what was the most challenging strategic decision you had to make, and how did you navigate, let's say, the internal and external pressures? So you had PWP we would want to talk a little bit about, but you were also buying back bottling operations, which, if I'm not mistaken, you'd spun off years before. So how did you make those decisions given the scale and the enormity of the business?
2 separate questions, because the scale of the company was huge. And the biggest challenge with running a company so big and so spread out is that whatever change you want to make at the top, you can articulate the change, but to implement it, you've got to get buy-in through the entire organization. So the message has to be crafted in the language that people in individual countries can understand and sign up to. So, for example, at the corporate level, we were talking about water reduction in our plants because we had plants in water distressed areas. We were using 2.5 liters of water to make a liter of Pepsi. Makes no sense in a town where there's no water for basic needs. So one of our goals was to reduce that water use to 1.3 or 1.4 liters per liter of Pepsi. You go to Russia with this excess water and you tell them you're going to reduce the amount of water used, they say, yawn. We'd rather use 10 liters of water to make a liter of Pepsi because we have a very high water table and we have a lot of water. That's just a small example. But country by country, we had to think about how to craft the performance of purpose message for that country. How do you get them on board? How do you talk about farmers in their country versus farmers in the US? I mean, a farmer in the Andes or a farmer in Mexico is almost at subsistence wages, struggling to stay alive. That's not the case with a farmer in the US. So, how you talk to them about a win win relationship with farmers is very different. So, when you think about transformation or doing something major at the top of a company to reshape the company, you've got to break it down into bite sized messages that can be given to every constituency in the company and outside the company in a language that they can relate to. And you've got to keep doing it again and again and again. And remember, those were the days where the iPhone had just about come out. 2006-7 is when the iPhone was launched. There was hardly any video conferencing. You couldn't text, no FaceTime, nothing. So everything was done by video, and then you send the videos out. Lots of brochures were printed and sent out in languages, and lots of pictures. So the whole way of communication was very different then. That was the single biggest challenge in executing, a change agenda in 180 countries. I'd say about 150, 30 were more distribution arms, 150 countries with more than 500,000 people, because 280,000 on our payroll. The other people were all manufacturers or contractors that worked with us, but all of them had to change.
Yes.
The funny phenomenon that I observed, which sort of puzzled me, is when you go to them and say, we're going to change the product portfolio. We had a lot of what we call fun for you products, Pepsi, Doritos, Lay's, great tasting, but they were essentially treat-like. And I wanted to do two things. One, diversify to include more better for you, good for you products with positive nutrition, or products with less fat, sugar, and salt. And anytime you go to give that message to people, they'll say, why are you trying to change this? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Hey, it is going to break because tastes are changing. Have you changed your tastes and your drinking and eating habits? Oh, yeah, I now drink Diet Pepsi, or I drink Aquafina, or I don't eat as many snacks as I used to, but we shouldn't change. So you see, what was happening, and where I struggled the most, was the moral core of people's lives and their livelihoods were at conflict with each other. So what do you do at that time? You've got to keep bringing them back to saying, hey, if you have changed your eating and drinking habits, that means you represent a larger consumer base that's doing the same. Example, when we had a birthday party for a daughter, her classmates came over and I served them Pepsi, and they said, oops, we have to call our parents to get permission to drink Pepsi. What do you mean you've got to get permission to drink Pepsi? Because they restricted how much sugar drinks or sugary products they could eat. Again, look at all of these are signals as to how the market was changing. So how you got the message out? Through stories, through lived examples, through what was happening in their own lives. Wives of executives helped a lot because they bought into the message sooner than the men did.
The men did.
And so
Because they were
helped
responsible
propel this forward,
for feeding their families and making those choices.
Yeah, so that helped a lot. What was the second part of the question, Anna?
Well, so as you were navigating all of this, so it was really the challenge. What was the biggest challenge in navigating the scale and changing strategic direction, which I think you've touched on.
The investors were a different challenge because they questioned a lot why I was doing what I was doing.
Yes.
So I was CEO for 12 years. I'd say the first 6 years were very difficult. I thought I'd lose my job any day because, CEOs serve at the pleasure of the board. And the board had bought into my strategy and they kept saying, keep doing what you're doing. But there were enough articles to say, she's an idiot, she's got to go. They didn't use the word idiot, but something close. Because the 4 CEOs before me running PepsiCo were white males, Christian, served in the armed forces, and had come to PepsiCo. And I didn't meet any of those criteria. And I'm totally different. And people started to write things like, see, the PepsiCo board made the wrong choice in putting her in the job. So the first 6 years were very difficult. The next 4 were, oh my God, she was so prescient. Let's see what else she has to say. And all of a sudden, I was much sought after. In the last 2 years, and since then, I'll be honest with you, there isn't a single prize that I have not received. Not a single one. I have my portrait in the portrait gallery in the United States because of performance with purpose. So I'm telling you, the first 6-7 years, my God, I don't know how I survived.
I know you don't sleep a lot.
Yeah.
And given your the years of working, that is not a surprising thing. But at the time when you were masterminding PWP, how did you decide what this was going to look like, PW? How did you come up with performance with purpose?
Well, it was, in retrospect, it was simple from my perspective, but somehow profound from other perspectives. Started off with saying, let's understand what trends are out there that are going to shape our company or going to demand a change in direction from our company. So we had different teams: manufacturing, supply chain, operations, marketing, sales. Everybody work on what are the big trends that you see in the world that are going to impact companies, consumer companies in particular, food and beverage companies more specifically, and therefore PepsiCo. So all these teams came back after about 3 or 4 months of work on the 10 mega trends that are going to impact PepsiCo as they saw it. And there was commonality with about 6 or 7 trends, and then we had to pick the other 3. So we developed the 10 mega trends and wrote a very extensive document as to what the trends were, what are the signals we're seeing that these are the trends, what changes do we need to make inside the company, with the people, with our products, with every aspect of the company, and the board, because we needed new board members to shepherd us through these changes, and how we're going to change the incentive structure. This memo or this document, 25-page document, I walked every board member through one-on-one, 4 or 5 hours with each board member, and they bought into it completely, and they said, this is the right way to run the company, go for it, we'll back you. And so I had activists in my stall. When all the criticism came, the board basically said, this is the strategy, we're not changing it, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, you had 2 quite significant activists.
Oh, yeah. Good friends, now
Good friends, yes.
Yeah.
So,
but they didn't get anything from me. Not a friend,
so early in your PepsiCo career, if I can step back for a bit, you were central to major strategic moves like the Yum Brands spin-off and the acquisition of Tropicana and Quaker Oats. So what at the time were you thinking about that, and how did that reshape PepsiCo's portfolio so dramatically?
Well, I was working for the CEO. This was also the CEO's direction. But the restaurant business, we were doing brilliantly at it when it required money to build new units. But at some point, that business slowed down. And what we discovered after much analysis was that it was a service business and we were a packaged goods company. And you don't take a packaged goods, non-service oriented culture and impose it on a service oriented restaurant business. So in many ways, I don't think we spun the restaurant business out. We unfettered it from the packaged goods culture.
Right.
And that company just went flying. It created enormous shareholder value. It was the right decision for Yum. We kept the beverage poor, but the rest of it, they were on their own. In the case of Tropicana, it was interesting because before 10 o'clock in the morning, nobody reached for a PepsiCo product. Right. The first time they drank or ate a PepsiCo product was at starting around 10 a.m. So the breakfast day part was lost to us. Right. So we needed a beverage for the morning day part, and we needed a snack for the morning day part, or something that would fill the morning, but they were good for you day parts. Yes. And we had nothing good for you. When we tried to make a bar, Frito-Lay would end up dipping it in chocolate and frying it. Because that's what we knew, all right? Our Pepsi guys came up with the Pepsi AM, but Pepsi AM does not sit well with the good for you day part. So in a way, Tropicana and then subsequently Quaker Oats fill the morning day part. So it was all against thinking about share of stomach. How do we think about day parts and share of stomach and consumer cohorts and fill every cell to make sure we had an offering for everybody?
So it was a real suite.
It was a complete suite, yeah.
So you had...
Remember, we were the second largest food and beverage company in the world. And if we had to grow ahead of global GDP, we had to deliver a top line growth of 4 to 5%, which means that as a company, we had to grow about $5 to $6 billion gross every year, which is adding the equivalent of a Heinz or a Campbell to PepsiCo every year. So it wasn't easy.
No, that's.
So you had to think about innovation very, very differently.
I know you did a lot of work on mega trends. I know you did a lot of work, and if you can walk us through a little bit about the branding, because that was really a mammoth task of getting an old school traditional company and starting to brand your assets and then start rolling them out with at football games and have sports stars behind, and you are such a sports fan personally too. Can you perhaps walk us?
PepsiCo is always a brand behemoth. We had, when I started as a CEO, 22 brands which generated over $1 billion in retail sales. Okay, brands like Pepsi had $17-18 billion, but 22 of our brands generated over $1 billion in retail sales, and we had another 18 brands which had between $600 and $1 billion in sales. So we were the largest brand powerhouse. And Pepsi was responsible for a lot of iconic campaigns across all of our brands. The challenge we had was, how do we get it into food service accounts, which are captive?
Yes.
So if a cricket team chooses to pick just one beverage company, it should be us.
Right.
So there were sports teams like the National Basketball Association or the New York Yankees that forever had been with the Red Company. And as far as I was concerned,
nameless.
yeah, as far as I was concerned, that was not going to happen. So the Yankees is a team I love. So I went at them relentlessly for about 6 years. Then we got the Yankees.
Amazing.
The National Basketball Association, I knew a new NBA head was coming in, went after them and said, look, we can do things for you that the other company has not done for you. And he asked me for proof. We gave him all the proof, and they switched after 8 years with the other company. Madison Square Garden shifted to us after 110 years with the Red Company. And so, it was making all these changes. But I think the root of making all these changes was our design capability. We had no design house in PepsiCo, within PepsiCo. We contracted design outside, and people thought design meant changing the yellow on a package or, changing the color red to a different Pantone. That was not design. Design is all the way into the design of the product, the package, how it's used, how it's disposed, how it's stored, the whole thing. So the best example I'll give you is Sun Chips. You aware of Sun Chips? There's a snack called Sun Chips, and it's a whole wheat snack, delicious.
I love that.
Yes, and I was at Frito-Lay for a review, and I was trying to eat Sun Chips. It was breaking and all over me, and I said, guys, who's this product for? They said, well, it skews women. I said, why is it 2 inches by 2 inches if it skews women? Which woman's going to take 2 inches and shove it into her mouth and try to eat it like I'm doing now, clumsy? And he said, well, the die cut is 2 inches by 2 inches. You see?
Right.
There is no design thinking which says, let's start with the consumer, work backwards. And see what we... The same thing, this one I got in a lot of trouble for. Doritos. Delicious snack. Cheetos and Doritos. But when you eat Doritos and Cheetos, the leftover nacho cheese on your fingers, most of the men lick their fingers, because that's the most delicious part of the snack. Many will put it on the surface. Women don't like to lick their fingers, at least not in public.
Right.
And they're definitely not going to put it on the sofa. So what is the equivalent of Doritos and Cheetos, which we can give women as a purse snack to eat it, so it doesn't stain the clothes or the handbag, but still is a great snack to enjoy. So all of these things had to be thought through very, very carefully with the designers. And that's where we made a huge difference in integrating design into the innovation process and creating a different company.
So I recall you had a powerhouse sort of interior design guy that you actually that you brought into the company
3M.
From 3M. But I also remember that you gave your top management a book, a leather-bound folder, and said, why didn't you tell me what design means to you? And you gave them 3 months, and then they came back.
Well, I gave them a book, a camera, and I gave them a coffee table book on design. I said 3 months, read the book, flip through the pictures, and whatever you think is design over the next 3 months, anything, it could be a pencil, it could be this clock. If you think it's great design, take a picture, put it in the book. And at the end of 3 months, of the 16 people who were my direct reports at that time, I think about 10 did the book. About 2 or 3 had asked their spouses to do the book for them. 2 hired external consultants to put the book together. And I think a couple others said, I don't need to do this book because it's a dumb assignment. But the 10 who put the book together, I would say 8 of the 10 were just so shockingly bad. You realize that we didn't have a problem, we had a crisis because people didn't even know what design was, or their perspective on design was not consumer grabbing design. It was some design which I couldn't relate to. And so it started there. I still have those books with me, those albums, for some days when I just want to go back and walk down memory lane.
Do you have a giggle with the quality of
I don't giggle, I'm in horror. It's no longer a giggling
and how
matter.
pathetic they were?
Right.
So obviously performance with purpose was very much your brainchild and it worked. So what does purpose mean to you personally today and in this phase of your life?
Well, as I think back to PepsiCo and then my childhood, whenever people ask, why does this company exist? We always say it creates jobs, right? In my case, I wanted us to create jobs. Absolutely. I wanted us to be that company that delivered great performance, actually provided jobs to people in every community. But I also wanted us to be a company that didn't pass costs on to society. That's really what I was focused on. I wanted us to be the defining corporation of the 21st century. As Phil would always say to me, you want PepsiCo to be the good company,
Right.
good commercially and good ethically.
Good ethically.
And so if you sit down and think about that, what aspects of PepsiCo did we need to change so that when people look back at the 21st century and say, what were the great consumer companies at the time? They look back and say, PepsiCo made a difference. And that was the whole idea of creating a noble vision, which is not about we're making 10% EPS growth, we're going to do 12, and that is our noble goal. Nobody likes those sort of financial goals, which really doesn't grab you by the heart.
But you were ahead of your time with what we know is ESG today.
I was not ESG, I hate that.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but it was sustainability, ethics, diversity was important to you in employment and in people. You were really ahead of your time before anyone was even thinking
But
about
Anna, I
that.
tell you, the reason we were doing it is for a different one. The reason we were doing it is because if we transformed our portfolio, we could keep our growth rates high. If we focused on environmental issues, 2 or 3 things happened. One, we saved costs, which we can put back into the company. We got a license to operate in society. Because if we didn't improve our environmental footprint, many countries were throwing us out. All right? And the reason we wanted to focus on talent is because with 280,000 people, we recruit 30,000, 40,000 people a year with attrition and then growth. And you want to draw from the entire talent pool as opposed to saying, I'm going to reject all these people and just focus on this talent pool that I'm familiar with.
Right.
So if you want to really draw from the whole talent pool and get the best and brightest, getting them in is one thing. You've got to retain them. Absolutely. So you've got to change the environment inside the company. And so the whole idea of focusing on the product. Thank you for that gin and tonic. No, the whole idea of
the Queen would be proud of you.
No. Yeah, the whole idea of focusing on the product portfolio, the environmental footprint, and people was nothing to do with ESG. In fact, ESG didn't exist when we did that.
Right.
It was about how do we create a virtuous circle where we do things on purpose that frees up cost and changes the culture of the company to deliver higher performance. So this virtuous circle is all that we focused on.
Well,
many people hijacked parts of it and called it ESG and DEI,
right.
which is okay. It was well-meaning.
But that was
not where we started.
But you demonstrated very clearly that corporate responsibility and financial success could be mutually reinforcing.
Totally.
Yeah.
In fact, I would go so far as to say business education has to be recast in that mold. We have to teach people that, yeah, shareholder value, you can focus on that, but be careful because somebody asked me the other day, when you were running PepsiCo, did you maximize shareholder value or did you optimize shareholder value? It's a trick question because if I said I optimized, I'd say, see, you left money on the table. But if I maximized it, let me tell you what I would have done if I was only focused on maximizing shareholder value. I would have cut long-term investments, outsourced, offshored everything I could, convert full-time employees to part-time, cut their benefits. And anything as perks that were given, whether it was a gym or whatever else in the office, cut all that. I would be maximizing shareholder value. I didn't do that. I judiciously balanced level and duration of returns to make sure this company goes on and on. I don't know what the word is. It's not maximize, it's not optimize. Sensibly ran a company. There is no word in the shareholder lingo to talk about.
That's right,
that.
because everybody's got such short
Maximize,
term.
optimize.
Everything is about the quarters.
Phil,
and
maybe you
those.
can think of a word in between maximize and optimize, and we can write a new speech about that. But that's what it was.
Well, you candidly discuss the sacrifices involved in your own career path. What advice would you have for young professionals here today about making choices and really managing the inherent trade-offs between work and personal life? You know, we have a lot of young people here that have been very excited to hear you and be here today.
You know, and getting married is a decision you have to make, all right? Having children is a decision you have to make, all right? And then going to work outside the home is a decision you have to make. And whether you really want to ascend is a decision you have to make. These are all major decisions, men and women. But if you choose to get married and have children, your first problem begins because, as I said, children are a tether, a beautiful tether. They complete your life. But to have children, they require an awful lot of time. They require money. And they require you to take time off from your relationship with your spouse to focus on the kids. You've got to understand what it takes. And if you don't have a support structure to help you with that, you can't do it.
Takes a village.
Yeah. And if you now try to have a career and try to move ahead, which is an awful lot of work, I'll give you the math. Think of every organization as a pyramid. There are no cylinders in organizations, they're pyramids. And in the case of PepsiCo, we had about 15,000 people in the management layer 1, which is, you know, the bottom of the entry-level management. By the time you get to CEO minus 3, you're down to about 300 or 400 people. CEO minus 1, you're at 15 people. There's one CEO. So think of this pyramid where there's attrition happening as you move up, at a point when the world is changing around you. So if you want to keep moving up, you've got to be awfully good to be moved up. And you've also got to change with the times. And once you get to a higher level, you can't get complacent because it's up or out.
Right.
Because somebody below you is sort of knocking on the floor saying, get out, I need that job. So if any of you commit to moving up this pyramid, just recognize that it's hell of a lot of work. You talk to me about not sleeping much. I just don't sleep much. Some people say, oh my God, how do you manage? I said, I'm blessed that I can't sleep because I can now read and work for 20 hours a day. Now, if I didn't have that capability, I would have struggled because that's what it took to be a CEO. That's what it took to be an executive, to have kids, to be a daughter. And I must say, to be a wife, because Raj was also working full time. And we both spent a lot of time away from home because he was traveling, I was traveling. You know, Raj always tells me your list is PepsiCo, PepsiCo, PepsiCo. Then it's your kids. Then it's your mother. And somewhere in the bottom, I think. And I always look at him and say, good news is you're right there on that list. Just be happy you're on that list. But what else can I say? You know, he knows he's at the top of the list.
He is. Indra, I'm gonna have one more question with you, and then we're gonna open it up.
All right.
But in your writing and in things you talk about now, you've noted the shift away from globalization to more nationalistic policies as the world is fragmenting. How should multinationals adapt their strategies to thrive in this very increasingly complex and fragmented geopolitical landscape?
Even when I was running this multinational, I started to see some fault lines because every country wanted us to adapt our strategy for them. And that's why wherever we went, if we went to China to build new plants, we aligned what we were doing with their 25-year goals. And every time we met with the Chinese ministry, we had to talk about how our manufacturing footprint and our focus areas align with their goals. I remember going to Thailand to see agriculture minister, etc., and sitting with them. His biggest issue was the farmers, because Thailand is such a big agrarian economy.
Right.
What are we doing for farmers? Everything we did had to align with a local footprint. And so I always say, every country we went to, we were in the country, for the country, with the country. And if you were not willing to do that, why do they need a multinational?
It's true.
Okay, so that was, you had to tailor the strategy for every country. And that goes not just for consumer companies, it also goes for technology companies. Maybe not as tailored as we had to be, but you still had to tailor your strategies. Today's world is a bit confusing because, multinationals in many ways export soft power from the country that they're domiciled in. And the foreign policy or the policy decisions of the country of your domicile impacts how you're perceived.
Yes.
So we have to be very careful. Do we really want multinationals from our country to go around the world? How do we support them with the policies that we enact as a government in the world that impacts the world? So it's a tricky time today, and let's see how it all shakes out.
We have a lot of friends in the audience from public policy and all over Cambridge and the business school, and I'm sure a lot of questions will come out.
Just be nice. No
So
politics. Everything else
I
is
have
okay.
more, no, exactly. But I'm sure you'll be asked a question. So at this juncture, I'd like to open it up to anyone. If you could just put your hands up. We have a question right in the back. Go ahead. Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us. So I'm currently studying the MPhil for Sustainable Development Engineering. And as an individual working in sustainable development, particularly in construction, I often find myself grappling between investing for sustainable outcomes and business as usual or stakeholder value. So during your tenure at PepsiCo, how did you sort of manage between that resilience thinking, trying to incorporate sustainability, and at the same time maintaining shareholder value?
As I talked about earlier, if you separate the two and say the choice between sustainability or returns, that's not the right way to present anything, because for us it was an and, not an or strategy. Because the only way to open plants in certain markets is if we use less water or had a carbon footprint that was different than what we started off with. So in our case, sustainability was needed to get a license to operate in that society and to in fact lower our costs to be able to put it back into growing the company. If you create a or strategy, meaning you have to trade off returns to create a sustainable business, then people revolt against it. That's the problem we have today. We have to think about how to marry the two. You will have to make investments in the short term, there's no question about it. But don't tank the financials so substantially that people get turned off by what you do.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
I'd like to build up a bit further on the previous question. You mentioned that at different points in your life, you had to make choices, individual versus institution, short-term versus long-term, market value versus shareholder value. How do you carry out the risk assessment for every decision? I mean, if you have a simplistic formula that the business school MBA candidates could utilize,
That's called your compass. It's very simple. If you have ethics and if you have a compass that's pointing true north, you'll be amazed how all of these decisions make a lot of sense. In my case, the megatrend work was my true north. Because when an activist came into our talk and said, cut all the investments you're making to transform the portfolio, cut all these investments in sustainability, and you'll give more money to shareholders. I'd say to him, before I cut those investments, let me show you the mega trends and what we're observing in the marketplace. Do you agree with these mega trends? He says, oh yeah, I agree with the mega trends, but I want you to cut the short-term returns. Hey, stop. These mega trends then result in these strategic directions and to these specific actions we're taking. So if you agree with the mega trend, we're not changing the actions. So I could sort of anchor on those mega trends. If you don't have the mega trends, then you're sort of blowing in the wind. And that's what happens to most CEOs. They don't have that true north that they can fall back on all the time. So you have to develop that first.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you for the great talk. I'm a Masters of Law student at Cambridge. I wanted to ask you more from the perspective of employees and companies, like how companies can foster cultures where men as well as women feel supported in taking paid leaves or flexible work structures and, not being a detriment for their career in future.
well, again, it comes down to personal choices. I know paternity leave is not as popular as maternity leave.
Especially in India.
Well, it's everywhere. When you give paternity leave to men, they just don't take it because they feel like if you're out of the workforce for 4 or 5 weeks, you fall behind. But again, it comes down to a choice. If you're going to have kids, you've got to look at family builders being both men and women. Family is not just female. Family is male and female. So the husband and wife have to get involved. But I'm going to get a little practical here. If you're married to somebody who doesn't want to take paternity leave, they don't want to take paternity leave. The baby still has to be taken care of. So just focus on the maternity leave. You can fight some fights, but some fights you just have to let it go. The more men that take it and gets more acceptable in society, others will follow. Our son-in-law to be is eager to take his paternity leave at the right time. And so I feel very proud of the fact that he's looking forward to not the paternity leave, but to bond with the child. And so the more men that step up to it, society will change. Okay. Now, the good news is there's a lot of talk in society these days about we need to have more children. And the fact the birth rates are falling off. So the only way we're going to have more children is if we do provide support structures. That includes maternity leave and paternity leave. And then it's up to the families to make sure that they take it. There's a question here.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you so much for your talk, and also you built an incredible legacy in one generation self-made. So really, thank you so much for your time. My question is straightforward. If you had the next chapter in your book, what is it going to be?
To this book? To this book. What would the chapter be? The thing is, if I was writing it right then versus now, I'd probably write a chapter now about everything in the world is changing. Technology is changing. Life as we know it. Technology is changing. Work as we know it. We don't even know what an entry-level job is today for a law student, an MBA student, leave alone an undergraduate student. We have no idea how to reskill people for this new world. And I'd probably write a chapter about the remaking of education. How do we educate everybody from kids to graduates to undergraduates to graduate students very differently than we have been doing in the past, because the changing world of technology and the exciting developments and the scary developments that are coming are all going to demand that we learn the technology enough to be able to adapt to the changes. So I'll probably write a chapter about education. Probably.
Indra, thank you. That's a very, very wonderful place to end. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as this is the final Angevin talk that I personally will be hosting at Queen's, in closing this evening, I would like to take a few moments to extend my thanks to everyone who took the time, to attend the talks in the last 5 years. As I said earlier, it started as an MCR initiative and has grown tremendously. This evening, we've had people come in from London, from the other place, from Oxford. So, Indra, thanks to you. We had some wonderful guests: Adam Grant, David Miliband, Gordon Brown, to name but a few. Thank you to Richard de Cordova, who's not here this evening, who always took care of our IT and media. Sneha Batista for logistics and branding and social media. Thank you, Sneha, and all your support. Mrs. Pope, who's not here, Sandra, for handling everything internally for us. Mrs. Clemens, who is here, for all of her tireless work, for the outstanding dinners, and to Pietro and staff who always supported us. Importantly, Dr. Robin Walker, who is also here this evening, sitting here, who is very happily here this evening. Robin, thank you for supporting us from the beginning, and also deciding on the name, the Angevin Talks. Robin named the talks after one of our foundresses, Queen Margaret of Anjou, who was the Queen of England in the mid-15th century and was married to Henry VI. If it wasn't for Robin, we would not have had this lovely name. So, Robin, thank you very much. To our president and my dear husband, Mohammed Alarian, for always giving us his support, sage advice, being a master at handling post-event dinner discussions with incredible skill and insight. And thank you for everything you've supported us with. Indra, lastly, a huge thank you to you for joining us this evening. What a privilege to have you share your life story with us and all your insights. I call you a force of nature, but that is really not an adequate description. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Well, thanks for coming. Thank you, Anna. I always will.